Okay, we're going to look at some of the megalithic stonework on the Spanish island of Minorca. It's attributed to the Phoenicians of ancient time, but most of these sites they try to date from around 3,400 years ago or 1400 BC. But strangely, we see a correlation in stonework and the way they set this up and T-pillars and so on that does look a lot more close to an age of Gobekli Tepe, which would be over 10,000 years, than it looks to the time that they give credit for. There are a lot of sites, even associated with the Phoenicians, that we can find over on the Levant coast that show less weathering by far than a lot of these. And that's one other thing that I want you to look at as we look here at a few pictures of some of these ancient megaliths that we see here. Now this is a T-pillar, but it has an enlarged stone that's up on top of it, and it looks like they put another little pillar up next to it that wasn't quite tall enough, and then they had to hand make a stone that fit right in there tight. It's still there to this day, but that one on top is extremely squared off, and you can see a lot of pitting that's in it and a lot of the other stones that we see here, and that's limestone eroding away the more softened portions that are in it. It's a different grade of limestone than we see in maybe the Great Pyramid and a lot of other sites, but a different grade of it, and it comes from coral reefs and the way that certain things form. But that slab on top, it looks like it was a little shifted out to this left side here a little bit, and so they put the extra little helper tree up next to it to hold it up. Let's just take a look through some of these pictures here and the different sites that they show. For we can see these T-pillars, like on the left that's here, and off on the right there's a pyramid, but it was half destroyed pretty much. You can see T-pillar that's shown here and something that's really quite intricate. Here's a grotto that's there, and you can see there's a stonework that's set up here that goes with pillars that are round on it that have all been fashioned and had giant stones put on top of them, and then they have lintel stones crisscrossing over the top of it. It almost looks like a spider web. And of course, it's the belief that they would have had over and above this woodwork over that, and so on, to complete that look. A lot of this stonework here seems precarious when you come to look at it, like this pillar here, which is just standing on a few separate rocks. They apparently wanted to have that a little bit taller. It's kind of weird where you almost can't understand it, where they could have put all those lintels down onto that right there, but instead they wanted to put that big chunk of rock, which is big like this T-pillar here, on top of three little rocks, just to get it up 6 inches higher. When you look at these, this has that look of Gobekli Tepe's pillars also, but the T-pillars on top of them are a mimic. I'm not going to show a picture of it right now, but if you look at the pillars that they've exposed so far, the top T-pillar part of it is still fashioned onto it. But you can see they left it just a hair wider than the rest of it, thicker than the rest of it, not even just more elongated, where the supposed to be a head and the hands that are coming around it. But it's a little bit wider, and then there's this clean line that's designating that. And it would be like, I don't know, the collar or the neck area of the head that would be coming out on there, and they have the line across there, and the T-pillar's much thicker up above that. Well, it's not much thicker above that, maybe the width of your finger on either side on some of them, or less. But it's quite visible. But here we can see a bigger, thicker pillaration type form that's run off of it. I don't know if you want to go with one happened before the other and how they would use this, but if they were better at stonework, this would of course be a little bit later. But they're not giving it that little bit later. They're giving it almost 10,000 years later, strangely. In the background of this here, you can see a wall, and it's a Cyclopian wall, and it's 30 foot tall in some places. And while it's just a jumble of rocks, they all fit together real well. And then everything that's facing out this side has all been smooth. Just like you see this pillar here, which is a smooth cut and a squared off piece. Then again, the top piece is really a kind of a trapezoid, isn't it? So there are a lot of these T-pillars they have here, and this is not even some type of, well, they've got a couple. And when we look at structures like this, and you can look down on it, you can see that they don't have the exact same structure that's at Gobekli Tepe. That there's not just two central T-pillars on it, but it does have the ring around it, and it's a double ring effect like you see. But it's thicker with that platform that's around the outside of it. You know, like you see over here, because that's just a bench in the other ones that are shown. But it also has that warping secret passage through a wall that leads out to a wider area and so on. They still have filled in with refuge that's there. And a passage that leads into a room that's here and so on. But it has a lot more connections and shape and things than it does misconnections in my mind. There's a building built over here, and it's pretty huge. You go in, and then inside of it, and it's all pillared up and held up, and it shows all these rocks and stone that they used to make a ceiling out of in it too. In my mind, when I look at things like this, out of all the archaeology I've looked at, this looks a little more close to Fred Flintstone than a lot of things that we were looking at. In fact, the only things that seem to take it out of that concept are these fine fashioned T-pillars and so on. If we didn't have Gobekli Tepe, we'd probably keep going with that concept. But now that we have Gobekli Tepe, one of the few things that should be really looked at is some of the carbon dates for this site. And some geologists to get a hold of it, because look at the sheer amount of erosion that's happened to this. It's a perfect circle, kinda. But inside is a symbolic womb that's exactly facing the east and so on. And this is something that is shown from caveman times all the way through to a modern time. And this oval shape that's in it, which is akin to ovum and egg and rebirth. And given that there's a few sites at a few of these locations on Minorca that have this situation that attached to them, one would say this is either a birthing area and associated with pregnant women or death. One or the other. A lot of things that are round that look just like this are built up like a tower, but it's lost its top long ago. Other ones are showing pyramid shapes that we'll look at here shortly. Some of them have lost their tops long ago. If you look at the sheer amount of erosion that's here, it shows you something. That all these giant Cyclopean walls, and what we're familiar with when we talk about the Phoenicians and their stonework is them having stonework that's like this, but it's better dressed than this quite a bit. and then it has perfect connections between the rocks and squared off, but inset on every one of these, there's this pillowed effect that's just 3/4 done, and it sticks out about this far, so it goes, and right before the crack it pinches in, and then that's all dressed out like perfect. Like they could have done them all that way, but they wanted to do it for a style, right? You've seen a lot of that work, but this is a Cyclopean art style. That there are two things going on here. This is trying to be primordially straight, and irregardless, they're getting it back to that point, but they're all different shapes. And it appears that they're trying on purpose not to make them stacked upon each other, but stacked across others. It's like we do brickwork today, but in a giant form. Don't have somebody standing here, but these rocks are huge. Some of these bigger pieces in this are like 60 tons. A lot of them are smaller than that though, but when you look here at the smaller part, they're all done in a Cyclopean way where it's just that jumble bit. But if you were to get up there and look at it, all of these here, if you turn the wall at it, would be pretty flat, because they shave all these rocks in here, much to do with they shave them and get them to where they attached all to each other for some godly reason. Who knows why? They go through the trouble of all of this, and it's been a while since we've done a video about this honeycomb effect that they have, and it looks like the cell structure on plant leaves and all of this that they've got, that they're going on with, that I, along with a lot of people, believe are much older. You see, because they did that timing and carbon dating, and they look at it and they say, well, 1400 BC and da-da-da, and here's one at this that says 1000 or so, so there was occupation or something going on in a fire, and that, and the other carbon. They had other anomalous dates, though. But those were easily thrown out. Why? Well, they seemed like they were real far-fetched, like 10,000, 12, 14,000 BC. There are pieces of wood here too, and some of them, one was found up under one of the slabs, or pieces of which, that apparently had fallen over but been up a long time before. And that piece of wood could somehow date. They could have 1,000, 2,000-year-old piece of wood sitting there for some reason, or just below the surface somehow, and then have it to smack on it. But the way they kept this area clean just doesn't make sense, and it doesn't look like it. And of course, all these anomalous dates. Look at this T-pillar, but it's got that extra size on it. That's the rib that's on there, and there's no hands going around these, but extremely well formed. And this is in the middle of a circle, which hopefully we have a shot of here shortly later, which does look a lot more like Gobekli Tepe. This little center rib has a little notchy missing out of it here, and then one out of here, but the one out here, you could have stuck a board in facing this way and had a board running all the way across here for a reason. Have to be an exacting one that fits in, and then it just fits into the slot. Looks like it's made to do so. They had roofs on these. There's a couple of depictions in here, if I can find them. Got the myriad of them. Look at this. This again is very Gobekli Tepe, where you have a wall of that rock that's jumbled together but set, but then there's a thing in between. It's a pillar set, and so there are pillars around, and then they made the jumble walls, and they made them to fit in between, and then in the center of that, here's a couple of pillars. They're not opposing each other. In fact, this one apparently fell onto that one but got stuck, and it's there, so leave it alone. But short of it having all of these T-pillars onto it, would have a totally different look or thought about this. Again, this is on Minorca. So a lot of people, wonder about the Phoenicians and how far they had traveled at and where they had gone to and so on. Well, in reality, they had come out Spain and gone up north and made all kinds of colonies. The only problem is that they pretty much had claim to it. They put out danger maps to everybody and led false ideas that they would tell people there were dragons in this area and a big sea creature and this, that, and the other. People know about that. Even in the Iliad and the Odyssey, there's places where you don't go through this one strait because there's this guy and this thing happens. Or a sea creature below and a whirlpool and all this stuff, and you just don't go through here. The people there know that if you're not in a Phoenician ship, they're supposed to throw rocks down on you, and it sounds just like that tale, except there's not a giant attached to it. There's just giant rocks. But they also had colonies outside. The Pillars of Hercules. The only thing is if you ever went out there, they would kill you. Some people said they would take you away and put you in the mines of Cornwall and and get you so turned around in the effect you had no idea where the hell you were in the first place. Other people said they just killed them all. Look at this well squared off building, and you can walk through the entrance here and through another area that would have been topped off before, but going through and then leading out and into this building, which looks very much like a pyramid. Only it's a little more cylindrical, so it's more like a cone. And even though it's made out of those jumbled stones that we talk about, the outside facing on it's pretty smooth. You can kind of tell right in here how going down, very little jag to it at all. You can imagine the amount of erosion that's gone here if we only give it the 1500 year dating, but looking at the amount of erosion that's on a lot of this limestone here, could really go back a lot older. But if they had that amount of erosion on there, or the older that we're talking about, one could see that these were even a lot more well smoothed off in ancient days, and then the cracks started to form in the areas between because of rain and things, and they would attack those areas and so on. So there are some pyramid shapes that are here too. Here's one in the distance here, but also the T-pillars that we've been looking at, and a circle and circles of stones. And some of these guys are well squared off and well formed for a reason. And you think about it, whenever somebody built this thing here, was it as all as thick as this, and they got it here and decided they wanted a rib right here today, and they shaved off that part and that part. There's a whole lot of work going on. Supposedly these are all from local quarries that they found around in places and stuff, but you look at the amount of rock work, and a few people have called BS on that. But you look at the amount of weight and girth of this rock that's here. That other version where it was showing you from a little bit of distance looking down quite a bit at it. There's another picture like that I've seen where there's a lady standing there with her kids. And she's not 1/3 as tall as that thing. Amazing size of it. It's over 20 foot tall. But you look at the girth of that cap and how many tons are associated with that, and getting it up on there and balanced on the top of a perfectly balanced stone below it that's been shaved so it sets perfect and can handle this. And while that rib coming out there is just like the rest of it is that thick, so it really helps on the idea of this thing standing here. But they already know that, hey, if I put that little guy up against it like they were talking about, that'll help out a lot. Well, they just started building the little rib into it then. They go, well, instead of getting a separate one and an extra rock, make it like it. Make it so. And then popped it on top of there, and it no longer wants to waddle around so much. But they can also build notches in those like we looked at, and build beams, if you will, across and from around things, so that works too. So I don't know if you're getting a Gobekli Tepe vibe off of this area here. Now I could sit and pick apart the discrepancies. Like there's two major entrances, it seems, that's going on here. That the bench that's around the side of it is much taller than the other benches are. That there's a section that's quartered off, and we don't really see that in the Gobekli Tepe areas. That there's four major pillars that are around on here with T's on them, or I guess they all used to have T's on them. Long gone. But it looks far more similar than it would look very different. Shaping, concepts, build, the whole 9 yards. One could probably look at the two and then say, well, one came from the other. Here's this other one where there's lady standing here. You can tell it's twice their height. So it's got to be something around 10 foot tall. Here's another one showing two T-pillars into it. And there's, of course, a crawl space over here in an open area where perhaps the shaman stayed. It was a nighttime thing for it, but the temple is over here to the right. But two of the T-pillars are still intact, and the T part on the top has been missing from the other two if it ever had them on there. But then also each of those have been shaped and set, and they're still balancing to this day. There's been enough earthquakes around in these islands and across this area that people have known about. And yet these things still stand. It's amazing. It's why a lot of it's trampled down, but a lot of stonework has been taken to do other things with later, if you will. It's another view of, I believe, the same structure on a different day and quite well lit. Again, the same type of structure. And again. So there's some differences. Sure, there's some differences. There's some differences between Gobekli Tepe Circle A, B, and C itself. So they added a rib to that one. Here's the lady with her kid. So you can get an idea here, you know, if you want to say she's under 6 foot, over 5, 10, 15 foot tall on that one. Big old chunk above it too that weigh a hell of a lot more than a truck. More like a tractor. More like 2 tractors. There are like 5 sites on the island itself. There are a few islands there, but this is more one of the major ones. There's Majora and Minorca. But you can see some big crumbling here, and that part of this had become lost and crumbled in. And then you look at the erosion on something like this and how much more eroded it is, and it's like, well, was this where that sites were saying that it was 10,000 years old? So effectively, some of this may be that old and other ones are reoccupations. I'm not trying to say they all go to that point, or even if any of them really do, but we should check into it a little bit more, because when they don't like that anomalous dating, especially just a few generations ago whenever this was going on, or a few decades even ago when this was going on, if it didn't really fit that narrative they were going with, or fit something with a timeline that had to go with the Bible and so on, they didn't like it. Giving it this timeline dating, it's really putting it, well, I guess something like the end of the Bronze Age. Definitely the end of Copper Age and start of the Bronze Age. And of course, then there was the destruction that happens through the Sea Peoples. Funny how whenever they had that Sea Peoples problem, if you look into it, they didn't get messed with too much. Apparently they were all pre-hooked up with all these people that were doing that. Look how finely shaped that one is. With all the erosion that you see around it. It's kind of amazing. And you see other ones that are much more eroded like this, and you think, well, that's got to be more time dating. And they try to say 1000 BC to 1400 BC. Geologists say that that's more than 400 years worth of erosion that are in between the two. And if you look at something that's eroded like this, it's more than that. I talked earlier how somehow the thickness of the top of them was a little bit thicker than normal, and here you can see a declimation right at this line here where this part is thicker, coming up and getting thicker with a head on it, almost like a Gobekli Tepe situation. A little different, but they wanted to make the wall just that thick, but then to stand that big old thing they got to stand on it just right. Maybe we'll go ahead and put this little shim thing so it makes it a little thicker and easier to balance. And it doesn't have to be the whole thing thicker. Proof of point. Again, circled with those rock walls and pillars that are in between it. So there's quite a few of these that are shown. And I want to try to get to a few pictures here that are a little more telling, perhaps. Here you can see where things have been shattered to bits, basically, and it's lost one of its T-pillars. The amount of erosion to this, and a pyramid in the background here. It's more of a trapezoid than it is a true pyramid, if you will. There's a lady standing out here in front of these. See the wall built behind her. It's more than double her height, but it also matches those big walls behind her, and so there used to be a roof over this whole place. Then you look at it like this, and it's more than 3 times her height, pretty much. Shows you something a little bit different, perhaps. And all these circular structures with T-pillars on top of it starts to look very familiar. But also attached to this, they have cave networks built in the wall that are next to where these quarries are, that they have that are like this. And they've shown places where they've literally sheared off the rocks, and they would put it on the boat for a short travel. And once it's been on the boat for that short travel, they pull them back up onto the shore and drag them to this point. So it's not like they're making them in situ or at the quarry, which would be so much more convenient. But they're not shown in doing it that way. they're kind of showing it that one more difficult way, if you will. And so here's one representation of the way that somehow this might have looked. That they would have had wood structures like you see on the left that they're building and mending, but then afterwards they thatch hut the top of it, leaving an opening. But in that opening you can see 2 pillars all around on this. Not too much difference, really. Very similar culture, if you will. Here's another one-time pyramidal type structure, or conical type structure. It's been rendered down to the ground. Look at some of these things they show, and they put these pillars in the ground in places, and sometimes they just stand them right up on the rock, just loose. But other times they put them in these slots that are right here, so they hold up real well. And sometimes, a lot of times, the T-pillars that are on top of it are also set in with slots. So they got it up there, but also they were able to put it and set it right in a notch. Yeah, like putting a wing on an old plastic model set where it has that tab and you attach it onto a tab. Pretty amazing. Even at 1400 BC, it's pretty amazing, but I believe there are portions, or a lot of these sites, that go back much earlier because the erosion doesn't look right for it or correct. One geologist took a piece of one of these pillars that had been shattered off, and it was easy to see that it had come right off of that big pillar that was laying there. And they took it to a well-known geologist and talked to him about it. Off the record, he didn't want to talk about it. But then looking at the patina on that, he says, well, this is erosion. It's probably about 15, 20,000 years old. But the only way to tell when it was freed from the other rock that you're talking about is to take another chip and look at it. And he took another chip and looked at it. And he said, so he knocked a chip out of it, if you will. This is a story and can't be verified because the guy turned around and said, I'd sue if you use me. But so they weren't supposed to do this, and the idea was they were going to take this rock and set it right back where it used to be, right in front of that other pillar where it had broken off before. But they knocked this other piece off of it. When they did, there was a definite patina inside of it, and then a part that wasn't. And limestone doesn't hold a great patina like some of the other stones do. But in looking at that, that had been there, 3,000-4,000 years. So kind of about the time that they said that it had been built, he's saying that it had been knocked down. But the strange effect, he said, was, hey, the patina on the outside is much, much thicker. And that dates from a time that was much older. I don't think this pillar was just sitting there from long, long ago, but 14, 15, 20,000 years ago. That's pretty strange. But then again, he didn't want to get himself put out there, did he? You look at this, and you can see remnants of a Gobekli Tepe type of look to it too, with circles. The thing that throws part of it off is it's not just circle, circle, circle. There are other things attached to it. In fact, what's really going on here is a big circle like this is attached around onto this, sitting inside of it. And there's even smaller circles. They're going inside of that. And I bet somebody could take sacred geometry and whip the hell out of this thing and show you a lot of connections. You know at Stonehenge how they have the stones and they have the little holes or concaves made in the steles, or the top stones that go on top, and then on the top of those pillars going up they've got the knobs and they match each other, which is kind of cool and different than everybody. There's a stone right there that's got that effect too, but where's the pillar that it came off of? Oh, it's cracked up in pieces over here, or there. Wonder where the knobs are that go with those two holes that are there. Pretty wicked awesome. So we're just looking at some of these pictures that go along with this, and these T-pillars and this structure that's well far away from Gobekli Tepe, but also it's on the edge of what people were willing to believe had anything to do even with the Phoenicians at the time, right? And there's still a question about that, for we call the Phoenicians of this one time and so on, but we're really looking at as ancient Canaanites, and they had boat travel a long time before that, so it's looking like that concept may come from an earlier time. And then now we're starting to show some recreations. Look how much rock is set up on this pillar that's here, and this one grotto that's still here. It's like 40 tons are set on top of that, which is ultimately amazing, and it stood through this test of time that's been going on here all of this time. Pillar with a doorway in it. T-pillar. I think we were looking at this one earlier, but you can see how finely it's made. Another view of it. Has a bit of an upside trapezoid effect on it on the top part of it too. There's one more picture of what the buildings or settlement might have looked like, and someone took that or one similar to it there and wanted to show that they had a full setup like this. That at one time it was a big meeting place, something was going on there, a lot of trade networks and so on, but what's the T-pillar all about? And the bigger pillars, was there a connection or a roof above it, or was this one that was just left wide open? Looks more like that they would have had roofing on all of it. But a lot of people don't know about this site, especially the fact that they've got some pyramid shapes and elongated pyramids, basically a trapezoid or two on there, and one still just well formed and still showing itself well. I did a video about that maybe over a year ago, and I showed a couple of T-pillars before I went off on the pyramid thing, but didn't go too deep into it. There's another collection of pictures here that are showing this Cyclopean semi-mixed architecture here that goes on, and a lot of it has remnants that look like it attaches to concepts we see going back to 10,000 years ago or more. Let me know what y'all think down in the comments. Peace.